We tend to think of the story of women's rights as one of continuous progress from ancient times until today. So you might have a chart that looks like this. But that's wrong. Rather than continuous progress, a chart of women's rights would probably look more like this. Basically, an upward movement, but with many periods of downward movement as well. Actually, as a matter of fact, it would be a lot more complicated than this because women might gain educational rights but lose sexual rights, or they might gain political rights while experiencing setbacks in economic rights. But in any case, the important thing is it's not a story of continuous progress. It is a story of change. Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Woman comes at a point of transition in the way that society viewed women's nature and women's roles. Earlier, for instance, in the Elizabethan period, the time of Shakespeare, men and women were considered to be essentially similar. They had the same nature and the same virtues. The only thing was men were better at everything, right? They were physically stronger, but they were also intellectually and morally stronger. In fact, during this time, women were often considered to be the more lustful sex because their rationality was not strong enough to control their physical desires in the way that men's was. So anything a woman could do, a man could do better. If women were consigned to doing cooking and childcare and housekeeping, that was because these were less important social roles that didn't need man's superior abilities. But through the 18th century, an important change had been taking place. Instead of men and women being viewed as essentially similar beings, they came to be viewed as fundamentally different. These different natures of men and women had a purpose. They were designed by Providence to suit them for their preordained social roles. Men were stronger and smarter and ideally suited to leadership, both political and intellectual. But women were better than men in certain ways. They had different virtues. So men were strong and courageous and persevering. They had integrity. They had rationality. But women had some virtues in which they were superior to men. Women were more compassionate, more patient, more selfless, more nurturing, more faithful, and more moral, more chaste, right, sexually. And these qualities, actually, some people even said that women were more religious than men were. And these qualities suited women to their roles as wives and mothers. So this set of ideas is known as separate spheres ideology. Women are suited to their roles in the private sphere, and men are suited to their roles in the public sphere. Now, this new ideology had mixed results for women's rights. Women could actually claim some areas of superiority, and that was new. Remember, in the old ideology, men were better at everything. And they could sometimes use this superiority to justify new public opportunities. So in that way, you could see it as improving women's rights. But, on the other hand, this ideology, the separate spheres ideology, largely confined women to limited roles in the private sphere and took away their public voices. And it also forces them to give up their claim to universal human nature. And remember, in the Enlightenment, that's what justifies universal human rights. So they're giving up something, even though they're regarded as superior in some ways. We are reading works by two women this week, both of which refer to Enlightenment ideals of freedom and of equality. The second reading is the autobiography of a slave, Mary Prince, who eventually gained her freedom in England. But the first is by writer and philosopher Mary Wollstonecraft, whom we've already encountered as an English supporter of the French Revolution, who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Men in response to Edmund Burke's critique of the French Revolution. We're reading a part of her work, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, one of the central texts of the feminist movement. Now, as you read, notice ways in which this work is still rooted in Enlightenment ideals. You can see her commitment to reason not only in the explicit references to reason and rationality, but also in the way she conducts her argument, convincing much more by rational argumentation than by emotional appeal. You can see her commitment to universal human nature in her insistence that men and women have essentially the same nature. In particular, she resists the idea that men and women should pursue different virtues, that some virtues are manly and that some virtues are womanly or feminine. No masculine virtues, no feminine virtues, just human virtues. All virtues are human virtues, and all people should pursue the same virtues. She opposes in this way the ideology of the separate spheres, especially the idea that men and women have fundamentally different natures. But also notice what she doesn't argue for. She doesn't argue that men and women are equal. She admits that right now it looks as though women are inferior to men in various ways. But she argues that because women are given an inferior education, we can't know yet whether they are equal or not. We need to educate them in the same way that we educate men, and then we can know whether the inferiority that we see is the result of nature or of nurture. She also doesn't really argue much for the expansion of women's roles. Instead, she argues that women need to be better educated even to do a good job in their current roles as wives and mothers. Society as a whole will be held back if the wives and mothers are not educated. So even though Wollstonecraft is writing in the Romantic period, her ideas are still much more affected by the Enlightenment. She wants to guarantee that Enlightenment ideas of freedom and equality are applied to women and to women's rights. Just as the French Revolution aimed to abolish aristocratic privilege, so it should also abolish sexual privilege. Being born an aristocrat should give you no right to power over the lower classes, and being born a man should give you no right to power over women. Okay, so now read the selection from Wollstonecraft in our textbook and post your small group post to the small group discussion board. I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas and your reactions to the reading.